Welcome to Down the Garden Path. I'm your host, Joanne Shaw, landscape designer and plant lover. I enjoy discussing down to earth tips and advice to help you seasonally manage your garden and landscape. And I also aim to bring you interesting and relevant topics to educate you all about the landscaping and horticultural industry. Hello, everyone, and welcome to October. It's Joanne Shaw, host of Down the Garden Path podcast. Thank you for joining me here once again. I'm excited about this show. I'm excited about this topic, because I've accomplished it in my own garden. So I'm really excited to share with you the steps in creating a no-till or lasagna garden. And I'm so excited because it is October. And that is the best time. October, November is the best time to do it. So I'm really excited to review all my tips and tricks with you on today's show. So, are you looking for reducing your lawn in your yard? Or are you wanting to create a new or expanded garden in your yard? Are you thinking about starting a new vegetable garden next year and planning on digging, planning out what area of the yard you're going to use and how you're going to dig it out and get it all prepped for the spring? Well, I'm here to tell you that now, the month of October and November, is the best time to do it and to do it with the least backbreaking and simplest way. And like I mentioned on the start, it's often called lasagna gardening or no-till gardening. Lasagna because of all the layers involved, although there's really not that many layers. And I think it's actually easier than, well, a different scale of making lasagnas. But anyway, or no-till gardening because there's no need to dig it up, figure out how you to dispose of all that sod or old soil. But you're also not disturbing the existing organic matter. So lots of research. It used to be in the old days we were like rototilling our gardens every year and breaking up and thinking that that was a good thing. But actually, it isn't because your garden is alive with lots of organic and microorganisms, and the more you till it and the more you disturb it, the more you disturb that and how you really kind of kill your soil. So I want to tell you how I did it with my garden. And I did it in 2016. I still can't believe it was that long ago, but it was. And it really helped me because, now I'm sure many of you are thinking, well, it's not a big deal. I can dig up my sod. If I want to start a new garden or make my garden larger, I can just dig up the sod and start a new garden. Well, the biggest thing is, what do you do with the old sod or the old garden or the weedy, patch of lawn that you have? Maybe there is no sod grass in there, but it's weeds. That is hard. Like, unless you have a trailer, unless you have someplace to dump it, it certainly can't go in the paper bags that we put out on the curbs here in Ontario. So it can be tricky. And I've had clients who've tried to do it themselves, and I've gotten the call because they've got this big pile of dead sod on their front lawn because they were trying to create a garden for themselves by themselves, and it actually is pretty tricky. So that's the best part, one of the best things about this method. So it really involves cardboard. So if you think about the cardboard almost as like the noodles in your lasagna, right? You are going to, and I will tell you, you will need more cardboard than you think you need. You will also need to make sure you remove all the packing tape and make sure you're using cardboard. I saved, this was even before, 2016 was before the whole Amazon thing. So the Amazon boxes are a great choice because they're very much cardboard. I ended up having to go dumpster diving and because I didn't have enough. And sometimes I ran into a dumpster that had some of the cardboard boxes that from the grocery store that fruit and vegetables came in, and they often had like a wax or a plastic coating on the outside, so you couldn't use those. So definitely recommend stocking up on just your regular typical cardboard. I often see people even on Facebook Marketplace or some of the free websites. Once they've moved, they're trying to get rid of their cardboard or their boxes, and they're telling people that come get them, for free, that type of thing. So there certainly are ways that are easier than ever to access cardboard. So yeah, so I'll tell you a little bit more about how I did it, and I'll go over some of my recommendations 8 years later on what I've learned and what I would definitely do differently and what I really advise my clients to do it differently. So as many of you may know, I live on a corner lot with no sidewalks, thank goodness. My garden goes from my front yard to like basically to the right of my front door, from my walkway all the way around the corner and it ends at my driveway. And that the driveway side is facing south and then kind of, southeast to east. So it gets a lot of sun. It did get a lot of sun then, and it gets a lot of sun now. And my garden was basically in the center of that big space, and it was surrounded by about 3 to 4 feet of sod or lawn from the curb to the garden. So again, because I have no sidewalks, my garden goes right to the curb. Now it does anyway. Well, that area of lawn, we lived here for several years and I could not keep it green, could not keep it looking good. And I didn't want to spend a ton of effort on it anyway. Hard to water because it was constantly in sun, a lot of salt left over from the winters because that's where the salt and the snow plows dumped it. And it was really a tough area. And there was a slight slope. So even if I did get desperate and try to put the sprinkler there or to water it, the water just ran right off and onto the road and down the drain. So there really was it was very, very challenging area. So I was really looking to expand the garden, remove more sod because it was just hideous. So I really wasn't attached to it. I did not want to resod or do anything like that. And I was looking, as a landscape designer, I always like to test new plants and test other plants, some of my favorites in my own gardens, so that I can share with my listeners as well as my clients. So I wanted more garden, and really in the end, less maintenance because the lawn can be a lot of work. So my research in solving my problem back in 2016 was lasagna gardening. And that is basically where you cover your lawn or cover your old, like if it's a weedy area, if it's an old garden and you're wanting to expand more into the lawn, or let's say you've just bought a townhouse or have some of those. I think of the city, a city front yards or backyards that are just basically a postage stamp. If you're really tired of having to have a lawnmower and you want to turn it into a garden, then this is the simple way. So, like I mentioned, you need to stock up on some cardboard. And you don't need to wet it down, but you definitely I needed to put some, partly because of the slope, but I needed to put some river rocks in some strategic places. You do want to make sure you're really overlapping the cardboard very well also, because any gaps that you have, grass or weeds will come up through. So if you're covering a weedy lawn or a weed patch, the weeds will find their way through. Or if you're covering a lawn, the grass will find its way through. Which for me was challenging along the curb, right? Because of the slope and how do you get cardboard and mulch really, really tight to the curb. So I did have some maintenance on that edge the following year, but in the end, it worked out really well. So again, cardboard overlapping, make sure, as I mentioned, to remove the packing tape. I didn't in some cases, many cases. I was finding pieces of packing tape in the garden. So I'm beyond that now. I've got that all removed. And what I did was, so to me, the true lasagna gardening is adding multiple layers. And some of when you Google online, you'll see where they're sometimes suggesting, 5 or 6 layers. Well, that's a lot of time and a lot of effort. and can be expensive depending on what material you're using. So I think you can do it fairly successfully with 3 layers. I did it with 2. I did it with the cardboard, and then I used a really high quality organic composted pine mulch. So it was really organic. It broke down into a soil very quickly. I put it on very thickly, but I do know that it was successful at creating a garden. It was successful at killing the lawn, but I never really improved my soil, if you know what I mean. So I still find that soil very dry, very clay. Um, and my plants are doing fine. My garden is doing well. I still have that slight slope to contend with when I'm watering my plants, but I think I could have done it better job had I used a manure or a compost before I put on the mulch. So that is my biggest advice for you is to, make sure you do a really good covering with cardboard. And then the next step is to add a manure or like a mushroom compost, something super organic and super that was really going to help improve your soil. So you've smothered the grass with the cardboard, and now you're wanting to add organic material at least 2 to 3 inches. So it's not a dusting, it is really, you don't want to see any of the cardboard. You want to really make sure that you're covering the cardboard with a good 2 to 3 inches of that organic material. And if you are doing a small area, it's easy, right? It might just be 2 or 3 bags of manure on top of 2 or 3 boxes spread out. So really, it really depends on the scale of your area. And mine, to be honest, was a fairly large scale. Even though I was going from an existing garden, I was going, so it wasn't like an all new garden, but having to overlap an existing garden right to the curb on a slope. It was a pretty good area to do. We got some of those large bags of that organic mulch delivered in the driveway. So we were able to have it, it was easier to take it out of those bags than it was to get, I've never liked dropping it on the driveway. That makes it you have to worry about the weather and all those things. So I definitely suggest looking into getting a delivery of mulch if you have and compost if you have a large area that you want to do. It's so convenient having them in those bags. You can work at it over time. You don't have to, there's no urgency to get it done before it rains. So definitely that's my second tip is to invest in and purchasing the soil and the manure materials that way. I also recommend, using really good material. I don't think you should buy bags of triple mix or anything like that because you don't need more soil. You already have soil that's under the sod. You already have soil there. So I think you want to add as much organic and nutrient-based material as possible because you want this garden to work in the long run. So that is definitely how I recommend doing it. So overlapping, adding a good 2 to 3 layers of compost or manure to the garden, and then doing mulch. Again, another 2 to 3, probably even more like 3, because it's amazing that once that starts to compress and once it starts to decompose, it really does shrink. So making sure you have about 3 inches of mulch on top of the compost, on top of the cardboard. Again, if you have to stake, if you have a slope like I did, or maybe your slope is even worse, you may have to do some stakes or maybe place more rocks in certain strategic areas to make sure that the cardboard is covered, is holding, is not sliding, is not poking up in underneath the soil or the manure and the mulch. And then once that's done, you could give everything a good watering if it's not raining. We've still been kind of dry here in October in Ontario, at least in my neighborhood. I heard it rained elsewhere in the city last night. I'm dating this episode by saying it's the Thanksgiving weekend here in Ontario. And but I'm reminded that this is a really good time to do this project. And because of the cooler temperatures and our lack of the ground freezing, and you can do it even into November. So yeah, so that way you have time to prepare. Once everything is done and you've got everything down, and it might take you, 2 weekends to do it. And I know I said this was the least backbreaking method, and I do think it is. And if you didn't want to order the big bags of compost or manure, you can and mulch, you can do them by the bag. But again, choose the best quality material that you have. And if your area is small, then that's perfect, right? Because it is easier to dump those smaller bags out in onto the yard. And believe it or not, once you're done, and once all of that material has been laid down, that's it for this year. You don't need to do anything. So the freeze and thaw, the water, the snow, everything that hits that area of your yard will really work to break down that cardboard and really turn the mulch and the compost into improving the soil that is underneath the sod and creating your garden. So by probably June, maybe May, depending on how the season goes, late May, early June, you can go ahead and plant your garden. Uh, Now, especially if you're doing a vegetable garden, you definitely want to make sure you're using lots of organic material. If you wanted to add a fourth layer, then I would add some straw. That seems to be a popular thing for, helping break down, covering up the lawn and covering up and helping to feed the new vegetable garden. So yeah, so that is basically the method. I think this is a great idea. I know of a lot of clients who don't want are tired of taking care of their boulevard, or their boulevard is, if they do have a sidewalk, from their sidewalk to the road, it's very weedy, it's very dry, it's very hard to take care of. And a lot of people want to, and as you're driving around neighborhoods, you're probably seeing more and more people doing this, where they're just tired of doing that and taking care of that, mowing that grass, or things may not be with the tree roots, the lawn isn't even growing. So that is another area where you can make it a garden. Maybe you're making the shade garden, maybe you're making a pollinator garden. Lots of ideas. And I can certainly help you with the plans if you need plans in order to what plants to put in. But I think it's a great solution to not having to break your back digging up sod, digging up old, dead, whatever kind of sod, digging up weeds, and then trying to dispose of it. So it's using the cardboard that is pretty much readily accessible. In the past, I think there were some concerns that people would talk about, the chemicals in the cardboard, the chemicals in the ink in the cardboard were not necessarily good for the soil. But I think by now we all have realized, especially Amazon, most of the printing, you know, everybody that ships a lot knows the environmental factors, and they're really switched to a lot of plant-based or vegetable-based inks, that type of thing. So again, you're not wanting to use boxes that came from chemicals, or I'm like I mentioned, that were coated with anything. You do want to make sure that it's good quality, if there's such a thing as good quality cardboard. But yeah, something that will break down. You often might hear people using newspaper, and when you Google it, you will get a lot of feedback as far as using newspaper. But these days, there's not a lot of newspapers being printed. So if you do get a newspaper subscription and you do want to let it pile up for a little bit so that you can start this project, then you can use newspaper. You definitely want to keep them thick, and you may even want to wet it down, which will help it stay in place. I had a client who moved in right away. They called me to help with their front garden design and front plant installation. But when she moved to this new house, she brought with her a lot of her existing plants, and they needed to quickly get them into a garden in the backyard. So they immediately did it with newspaper. This is probably about 4 or 5 years ago. They They saved up a lot of newspaper, a lot of the newspaper they used from moving, when they wrapped their different things. And they created a big kind of island bed in the middle of their lawn. And so that she could put all of her plants that she dug up from her old place right into the garden, because they, also it was a big area actually, and they didn't want to waste time and effort digging up the grass and trying to dispose of it. So yeah, it worked well for her. But like I said, it is much harder these days finding a lot of newspaper. And I think cardboard is a little bit easier to work with, especially on a windy day. A little bit of like a river rocks, a few rocks, or things that you may have around the house to hold down the cardboard until you get all of the organic material layered on top of it. So there you go. Like I said, I did this in 2016. I have mentioned it in our book. Matt, I remember my past co-host, Matthew Dressing. We talk about it in Down the Garden Path, a step-by-step guide to your Ontario garden. I have pictures of my garden, so you can see the before and afters in that in a section in October in our book. And I'm going to post some new pictures of what the garden looks like now. And I'm really ready, actually, this fall to do a bit more work in the garden. So I'm going to remove my barberries. I'm finding that my barberries, rose glow barberries, have gotten really large and invasive. So I think it's time that I remove them. They've done me well all these years, being something that was very drought tolerant and a really tough plant for tough conditions. But I am finding it to be invasive, and it is considered invasive. So I think it's time that I remove it and make room for some new plants. So I'm excited about that, and I'm going to use the opportunity to add more organic material to that soil. So adding some more compost and manure, or at least getting my contractors to help me with that, adding and feeding my soil as I add a few more new plants. But I'm really more thinning out than anything else because my garden has gotten quite full. So I'm excited to tell you more about this method. I have, again, also an article on my blog, on my website, with that also contains the pictures. If you have any other questions about it, please reach out and let me know. Let me know if you've done it. I think it's a really great way. And I think of especially those small yards where it doesn't make sense to even have a lawnmower. If you have a small little patch of front lawn in a small little area of the boulevard, then this is something to really consider. And doing it now here in October will really hit the ground running in the spring. So you're not going to have to worry about it, and you can start immediately planting right into it. So I'm excited for you to try, and I'm excited for you to tell me how it worked out. And thank you for once again listening to me here on Down the Garden Path podcast. And I look forward to hearing more about what you're up to. So please feel free to reach out to me on Instagram or on our private Facebook group called Down the Garden Path podcast. On Facebook, it's a private group for just my listeners. So you can always reach out or send me pictures there. And I look forward to, I will post some pictures of what my garden looked like this year as well, so you can see the differences and see how everything has grown. So certainly I do want to recap there that despite me not feeling like I added the most nutrient-rich material, my garden has done really well. So, I think I just want you to not make the mistakes I made, and maybe you will have a little bit more success, and in having a really good soil, especially if you're doing a vegetable garden. I think that's really important also. So once again, this episode is brought to you by Down to Earth Landscape Design. I'm Joanne Shaw, happy to do a landscape design for you anywhere east of the GTA in Durham region, or virtually if you want to reach out and have a chat. Please check out my website where you can book a call and we can talk about your plans. Thanks again for listening and joining me down the garden path. Bye for now.